That's Jimmy Stein. I'm Clint Lamb, and this is the Cover Crimson YouTube channel. Jimmy, it's time for some football, brother. We are only days away from Alabama taking on Florida State in the season opener. First of all, we're going to be kind of previewing the game, Alabama's offense versus FSU's defense and vice versa. But before we do that, what are kind of your thoughts on Alabama, not only going into this game, even if you can specifically talk about this game, or more as like a season preview kind of thing, as far as like how you're feeling about where things are trending?
I think trending positive. The slew of national media experts in the past few days that have predicted Alabama to win the national championship uh, should be sprinkling optimism in the air for everyone. But at the same time, it's a little disconcerting. It's a little surprising to me. I'm not surprised that national experts look at this roster and look at this starting lineup and say, hey, that Alabama team might be pretty good, and rank Alabama high. That wouldn't surprise me at all. But the number of experts that have picked Alabama to win the national championship has surprised me, just simply because you're coming off a season in which you lost 4 games and didn't look very good at all at times. But new season, new team, new lineup, second years, right? Kalen DeBoer's second year at Fresno launches him into the Washington job. Second year at Washington launches him into the Alabama job. Alabama's last 2 great football coaches that won national championships, Gene Stallings, year 2, 11-1, top 5 finish. Nick Saban, year 2, goes to the SEC championship game, I think ranked as the number 1 or 2 team in the country. So Saban and Stallings both monster year 2s. Everything is lining up for Alabama to have a monster year. Now, does that mean winning the SEC? Does that mean winning the national championship? Those things require some bounces to go your way, frankly. Let's remember, last note, let's remember last year's national champion, Ohio State, deserving national champion, best team in the country, had the most good players, finished the regular season 10-2. They lost twice also. This is the new world we're in.
Yeah, predicting how it is tough to do both of these things. Say the SEC is far and away the toughest conference in college football, and then simultaneously say you think Alabama or anybody else is going 11-1 or 12-0, because like you said, the Big Ten's national champion last year, they went 10-2. And the SEC, in my opinion, is a much bigger juggernaut than anything that the Big Ten's going to offer when you talk about the depth. People will debate that, but I think 10-2 is a safe place to put them. I wouldn't be like I guess in some ways I would be pretty floored with 11-1 based off of what we're talking about, and with the way that you have more mulligans, considering there's a 12-team playoff. It's the age old saying, it's amazing what you can do when you have to. Well, back when you had to go undefeated, you found a way, if you were going to win the national championship in most seasons, to go undefeated or lose just one game. And then you started getting some more mulligans involved. And it's like, okay, that demand, if you want to get there, you don't have to do that. So then it started becoming some 10-2 national champions a little bit more often, rather than the rare 2-loss LSU team that won the national championship back during the BCS era. That was extremely rare. Or is that the only time it's ever happened?
I believe so.
Yeah. So now that you're able to go, lose 3 games and stuff and still potentially get in, obviously there's going to be debate there, but I think you're going to start seeing more commonly 2-loss teams, and then also maybe some 3-loss that are sprinkled in there as well. So I think it's a very good point. Specifically talking about Alabama versus Florida State.
Mm-hmm.
Alabama, last time I checked, which I guess it has been about 24 hours, but they were a 13.5-point favorite. I think the over-under is about 50 or 50.5. Yeah, okay, so it's climbing. What are your thoughts on Florida State as kind of a bird's eye view going into this game?
My first thing to talk about this game is rain. As we record this, I checked, it's like a 75% chance of rain. So, I mean, it's gonna rain, and we need to accept that. And that is going to have an effect on things. Even led me to do a little brief research on rain games and the spread. And because I have in my head this idea that rain means underdogs win more often. and the under comes in more often. Those things apparently are true, but they're not true enormously. I mean, but they are true in terms of over 50% of the time. Uh, when it's a rain game, over 50% of the time, the under hits, and over 50% of the time, the underdog covers. You know, uh, in rain games, and it makes some sense because obviously you have a slippery ball. The one article I read even went so far as to say in NFL games about how much the quarterback's percentage completion drops, how there's more turnovers. All these things are proven, and so the rain makes me nervous. I'll be honest, because I think as the favored team. Um, Rain is sort of an equalizer. Everybody's slipping and sliding. Talent matters a little less when everyone's slipping and sliding and there's turnovers. We also have bats in the belfry, as I'll describe it, because the last two times it rained on Alabama in Florida, it didn't go well. First quarter against Michigan, the rain was disastrous. The South Florida game in 2023, which is ironically the last time we saw Ty Simpson in a major role at quarterback, didn't go great. I think Ty's performance has been over criticized in that game, but overall for Alabama, didn't go great that day. So the rain makes me nervous, and I think it changes the matchup. But to the matchup, I think one sentence sort of encapsulates what I expect, and that's just that Alabama has more good football players than Florida State has. And that's why they should, regardless of conditions, win the game. They might not win it in a fashion that makes all Alabama fans rejoice and say, wow, this team is going to be the national champions. But they probably will win the game just simply because they have more good players than Florida State has.
You bring up excellent points, and I do this all the time, man. I don't know why I do it. I knew that it was a pretty good chance of rain, but that just starts to slip your mind as you're diving into the X's and O's of this. You're really looking at those teams. And so we were supposed to give a preview, with a score prediction to A to Z Sports. There's about 4 or 5 of us that are doing it for this game specifically. And, I never mentioned weather. And based off of my score, I would probably, now that I'm thinking more about it, I probably would go lower. Here's what I will say, though. And I don't mean to, I'm typically the optimist. And, I don't want to, right out the gate of this show, just start worrying Alabama fans to death. But we also are going to be realistic. We're also going to talk about some potential concerns. And so let's talk about them. And I think you bring up an excellent point. But, okay, what does Florida State under Gus Malzahn offensively, what would you say is the primary thing that they want to do, run or throw?
They want to run the ball.
They want to run the ball. When you think about Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb, what do they want to do primarily?
They want to throw the ball.
Okay, so that's number one. Number two, think about Alabama's top 2 position groups on the roster. What would you say that they are?
Wide receiver and defensive back.
What does that normally lend to?
Throwing the ball.
And stopping
the pass.
So the reason I say all that is to say,
you're scaring me here. You're scaring me. This also the Labor Day is coming up. Now it's starting to feel like Halloween a little bit.
Well, that is the unfortunate truth of the way that these teams are built. Now, I'm not saying Alabama can't run the football. I think they should be able to. But, just based off of what Florida State's going to want to do, when you break it down to the bare bones versus what Alabama wants to do, I mean, you're kind of taking away 2 of the biggest advantages that Alabama is going to have, whether it be offensively or defensively. They have a good run defense, in my opinion. So it's not like I'm saying, oh, man, their weakness is run, and this is playing right into Florida State's favor. I'm saying as far as, both teams are going to have to still try to throw the football. So if you put Tommy Castellanos in a position where he's throwing it to the secondary and it's wet conditions, they can take advantage, generate some turnovers, some strip sacks, some interceptions. So I'm not saying that, I'm not saying it's time to panic. But when you are looking at this game, fans need to be realistic, because if you expect Alabama to go out there and completely blow them out and to look exactly how we think they're going to look this season, the weather conditions could end up playing a much bigger part in that than we think.
Yeah, I think rain, boy, the way you laid it out there, it's almost like, hey, it's going to rain, and Alabama's response is, uh-oh, and Florida State's response is, yay, I mean, it does seem to play into their hands. But again, will it negate Alabama's, I don't want to say tremendous talent differential, but it's significant. I mean, no one's got Florida State in the top 25. Their biggest all-star player to me. Now, someone's going to emerge, but in the preseason, their biggest all-star player to me is their nose guard. That which isn't really going to move the meter. Alabama's is a wide receiver that's on the cover of Madden or whatever, or the NCAA game or whatever it is. uh, I don't do video games. I'm so, other than like asteroids and Pong, Space Invaders. I
Oh
do that,
yeah,
but
classics.
yeah, but not football games. But Alabama's got more good players than Florida State. I still think that's going to win out, but the rain will make me nervous. Now, here's a couple of other things that make me a little nervous is that Gus Mount, Florida State last year didn't seem to have good chemistry. It just didn't work. What Florida State's doing now has all the ingredients to work in the sense they're bringing in an OC that wants to do a specific thing that he's really well known for, and they've brought in a quarterback that seems to be a really good fit into what the OC wants. And now they've supplemented it with fifth-year senior transfers all over the place, particularly in the offensive line. 4 fifth-year senior transfers are likely starting on the offensive line for Florida State this weekend. So they're going to be old and veteran with a nice mixture of OC and quarterback running specifically an offense that gave Alabama some issues a year ago from Diego Pavia, kind of similar to what Diego Pavia does, kind of similar to what Oklahoma conjured up against Alabama last year to have a lot of first half success. Even other running quarterbacks and RPOs did well against Alabama. South Florida's quarterback rushed for 100 yards against Alabama last year. So you add all that up, and there's a lot of reason for concern and anxiety. But again, I end my essay there by saying, reminding everyone once again, Alabama's favored by nearly 14 points because they have more good players than Florida State does, and I expect Alabama's going to win this game.
I do too. Yeah. So I don't want, it's kind of, I have Alabama. The way I put it, wouldn't be shocked at all. This is a Gus Malzahn offense. He seems to get really innovative when it comes to playing Alabama, or at least that's the way he was at Auburn, biggest rival. And if he continues to do that, then I could see Alabama getting down early. That is not ideal. When you're trying to break in Ty Simpson and get him comfortable and confident, you would hope they start as fast as possible, put points on the board, and then let him kind of build off of that, whether it be defensively or offensively. But, that I could see Florida State throwing some wrinkles in there early that catches Alabama off guard, tries to get the crowd involved, causes some panic from Alabama fans, some anxiety. Ty Simpson has talked about this week, talking to Nick Saban and anxiety and nerves and how to control that and all that stuff. I mean, those are things that you probably don't want to hear if you're a fan. I think he's being honest, and anybody that tells you that they don't have that when they're finally getting ready for their first start, there's going to be some nerves. But, I think that's why Alabama, the guys around Ty Simpson need to do what they can to make his life as easy as possible as he kind of gets used to things. And then once he settles in, I think Alabama in a typical non-rain, non-weather affected game, I think he would settle in and do extremely well. Will he if it rains? And, it depends on how much. It depends on other factors, weather factors, wind, all of that. Because that USF game, it rained for the first half. It kind of set the mood as far as the momentum and stuff and really put Alabama into a rut early. You talk about Michigan, same thing, but it didn't rain for the entire game. There were opportunities for the passing game to come out there and make some plays. And so hopefully it's not a nonstop rain deal in Tallahassee this weekend. But, based off of what you say, I do think rain is going to be an important part of the outcome of this. And just fans need to understand you might have to win ugly. And you might not know exactly what this Alabama team is until, week 3 against Wisconsin or week 5 against Georgia, because Louisiana Monroe, I don't know how much that's going to tell you. And week 1 is how they want to win and how they're probably going to win might not be how they have to win on Saturday. So that's just something else to keep in mind when it comes to Saturday.
That's a great point about doing what you have to do to win the game doesn't mean this is what Alabama's going to look like for the majority of this 12-game season. They might just have to do what it takes to win, which means it's raining so bad that, hey, we're just going to turn this into a slog fest of run game, and it's our run game against theirs and our run stopping against theirs. And I like Alabama in that matchup. I do. But do I like Alabama to win 35-0 in that matchup? Probably not. Probably not. They're going to have some level of success, both running the ball and stopping the run. And I don't think Alabama would win by a very large margin. As I pointed out at the beginning of the show, in rain games, bet the under. That's what the sharps tell everyone, bet the under. And when it's the under, that means also betting on the underdog. Fewer points favors Florida State. If there's only 20 points, total points scored in that game Saturday, that favors Florida State, no doubt, especially in terms of keeping it close, but even in terms of outright winning the game. If there's 50 points or more scored, you can bet Alabama's doing a lot of that scoring based on the makeup of the team. So I do think the rain is a huge story, but it's more I mean, everybody wants to know, I think, Luke, Clint, sorry,
It's all
Clint,
good.
what I think everybody wants to know, not just, hey, what's going to happen Saturday, but what's this team? And you are, like you just so smartly said, we might not really know much about Alabama's team if the weather's bad and you're playing Monroe. Probably take to Wisconsin, assuming good weather that day, that you really see what Alabama is in 2025. And that would be okay. I think in this landscape, as we've already pointed out, it's really more about survive and advance.
That's right. Yeah. And, so we'll get more into the specifics of like Alabama's defense versus Florida State's offense. That's where we'll start. Offensive coordinator Gus Malzahn, former Auburn head coach, obviously has been the head coach at UCF the last few years, takes kind of a demotion to make that move to Florida State, kind of similar to a Kane Womack or a Chip Kelly when he went to Ohio State. He's hoping that this kind of can position him to have more talent at his disposal. I don't know if that will be in 2025, but just, obviously more than he's going to have at UCF, and then maybe launch him into a better job later on. I think that's probably the goal, unless he just loves being an offensive coordinator. But, when you watch Gus Malzahn's offense, it primarily runs out of 11 personnel. You're going to see some 12. You're going to see some 10. But, they're going to primarily run that one tight end, one running back, a lot of inside zone, a lot of zone reads off of that, a lot of RPOs. There's going to be a tag off of pretty much every play with an RPO built in. So it's RPO, it's inside zone, and it's zone read. That's kind of the three things that you need to be focusing on if you were an Alabama fan as far as what to expect from this offense. Now, how they do that, they attack it in a little bit different ways, but, that's kind of the bare bones of it. Tommy Castellanos, with his ability to strain you with his legs, that's an element, a +1 in the run game, and you have to be able to take that into account. Now, when I go back and watch the Vanderbilt game, there were some times where Alabama did struggle to stop the quarterback run. But, man, for the most part, they actually kind of had Pavia locked up as far as his legs. Now, he escaped and made some plays with his arm, but as far as running the football, I mean, it was – against Georgia, the name of that game was the inability to get off the field on 4th down, because Georgia was going for it in the second half on 4th down pretty much every time. So they were getting stops on 3rd. They were doing what they would typically need to do, but adding that extra down really hindered them. Against Vanderbilt, it was the inability to get off the field on 3rd down. And that was why, you saw the result that you did. And then just there was some Pavia magic in there. If you're going to beat Alabama like that, typically there's going to require some type of guy making some just how did he do that type of plays. And that 4th down, just about to get sacked and he just throws it downfield. Like, those are the kind of things that are just kind of fluky. It was a low percentage play, and yet it ended up hitting for Vanderbilt. If some of that stuff starts happening for Florida State, Alabama could be in trouble. But, I don't know if Castellanos has the ability to press the ball vertically like you would probably want him to, but his legs are going to be the main concern for Alabama. And Gus Malzahn, one thing that he has always done well is how he has designed his offense. It puts the quarterback in a position where it's difficult to stop his legs. So Alabama's got to play assignment football. They can't get frustrated, and they got to understand they're probably going to get popped a couple times. Bend, but don't break.
I think Castellanos, I've compared him to Pavia just because that's what Alabama fans have seen. And I do think in terms of what the offense is going to look like, I mean, what you should anticipate Saturday, the Vanderbilt thing is sort of about as close as you've seen lately that Alabama's played against. It's going to look like Saturday. But Pavia, to give that kid a ton of credit, he has lifted the entire Vanderbilt program. He lifted it. I mean, he put a lot of it on his shoulder and said, hey, Vanderbilt's better now because I'm here and I'm the quarterback. Thus far in his career, Castellanos has not been that guy. As a matter of fact, he lost the job at Boston College and sort of was sinking Boston College. Now, he was a square peg in a round hole in terms of what Bill O'Brien wants to do with the Boston College offense. That's not necessarily on Castellanos there. I mean, he's a specific type quarterback. He needs a specific type offense, and putting him in a pro-style offense like Dylan Lonergan will run this year at BC, that's not his thing. But even when it is his thing, he has not been a program changer or a program lifter like Diego Pavia has been, and I don't think he's the passer that Pavia is. One of the misnomers with Alabama fans last year is that, Pavia killed Alabama. He did it mostly with his arm, as Clint pointed out. It was really plays with his arm, Pavia magic, as Clint put it, so astutely. I agree. It wasn't like he was just running wild all over the field. As a matter of fact, Vanderbilt's running back and Stowers, the tight end, on some end arounds, that was hurting Alabama in the run game more than Diego was. But Pavia was making plays with his arm on third down as Alabama had to overplay the run defense, because that's what you worry about against the guy. But he'll burn you with his arm when you do that, and he did that day. It was just a great day. I agree with Clint. If Florida State pulls this off, it's because Castellanos had a Pavia day. We call it at Alabama a Stephen Garcia day. We've called it that since 2010. Was that dude at Oklahoma, Travis, whatever?
Trevor Knight.
Trevor Knight, that's it. Yeah, he had an unbelievable day against Alabama in a bowl game, which he played unlike any other game. Zach Calzada had a nice game against Alabama today. So it's happened. I think some pessimistic Alabama fans think that happens all the time. It doesn't. That's why we can name them, because it doesn't happen often. But for Florida State to pull this upset, it would have to be Castellanos having one of those type days, which is not the norm for him, because he has a lot more in common with that list than he does the other list of quarterbacks that have beaten Alabama, like Cam Newton and Johnny Manziel and Tim Tebow and Trevor Lawrence. He ain't on that list. Those dudes are just freaking good every week. They were good against Alabama. They're good against everybody they play. But Castellanos is going to have to play out of his mind. He's written a lot of checks with his mouth, and now it's time to cash them. Maybe he does. Maybe he does. It is a good fit for him. You probably won't see the Castellanos quarterbacking disaster you saw at Boston College. You're going to see a better Castellanos because this offense fits him. Now, what do you think? I ask you. They're probably better personnel-wise than they were a year ago on offense, but there's all these new pieces. And not only are all these new pieces, there are all these new pieces playing for Gus Malzahn's offense. How do you piece together the Boston College quarterback, the Oklahoma running back, Gavin Sawchuk, who's going to play a lot Saturday, the USC wide receiver, the Tennessee wide receiver, 4 senior transfer offensive linemen, like a Micah Pettis who came from Ole Miss. He's going to be their right tackle, I think. How do you piece all that together playing for Gus Malzahn, which isn't just, in the NFL, all these guys can move around from team to team to team because the playbooks don't really change. It kind of looks the same for all 32 teams. College football is wildly different that way. Gus Malzahn doesn't run an offense like everybody else runs. What do you think about how can you piece that together in game one?
That is the $1 million question. And if you want to talk about whether helping Alabama relative to Florida State, I think you nailed it. Alabama's offensive line will have 4 players who got at least 2 starts for Alabama last year. And Wilkin Formby played close to 300 snaps at right tackle. Gino Vandermark had a couple of starts and played over 400 snaps compared to Jaden Roberts, who played just over 500. So a pretty even split there. So, and you've got an SEC offensive lineman with SEC experience in Cam Dewberry. Now, he hadn't played with those other guys. That's going to be new, probably going to be some breaking in there. But the fact that you have 4 guys who played together last year on this offensive line, despite the fact that you don't have Jaden Roberts, which is pretty remarkable when you think about it, compared to Florida State, who's going to have 4 transfer offensive linemen who have not played together. You talk about running the football, the combo blocks, they don't really work up to the second level too much. Typically a first level blocking team, but at the same time, if they have to run the football and they're limited in what they can do off of that as far as the RPO, like I will say, Tommy Castellanos in the short to intermediate parts of the field, he's actually not a terrible thrower. Yep. But, and that is something that kind of plays into Florida State is I wouldn't say he's a great vertical passer, but in these types of games, if it's messy, you're not going to see too many vertical passes anyway. So it kind of plays into what he does well. While when you look at Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb's offense, they do want to press you vertically. That is a big element of the offense. And Tony White's defense is prone to allowing explosive plays. So, it's like if you don't have that at your disposal, that kind of plays into Tony White's and it kind of plays into Gus Malzahn's side of things. But Alabama has its advantages as well. And one of the big ones is that continuity with the offensive line. And you would expect them to be able to work in unison a lot better, generate a better push. And you've got, Richard Young is a powerful back. You talk about Daniel Hill. If you got to win ugly, Ty Simpson, he's got mobility as a quarterback, a lot of mobility. So implementing his legs when he's probably not able to do as much through the air as he wants to do, that will add another wrinkle or element that Florida State's got to handle. And when you talk about their defense, they're breaking in a lot of guys on that side of the football too. But to your point, you've got, 2 of your 4 running backs that we're expecting to be involved. One of them's a true freshman, one of them's a transfer. You got 2 transfers starting at receiver and a true freshman starting at receiver. You got a transfer starting at tight end. You got 4 of your 5 offensive linemen who are transfers coming in. It is such an unknown kind of across the board. And that's why I say maybe Florida State ends up being really, really good and everything clicks. I mean, you don't really see that come together quickly. They would probably be a much more dangerous team towards the end of the year than they would be at the beginning. So if Alabama's catching them, I don't know what their season's going to look like. Maybe it doesn't ever come together, but kind of you looked on paper at Ole Miss last year and you said with the transfers they brought in, hey, this is a national championship contending team. And I guess technically they were in the conversation for the playoffs, but I think relative to the expectations, they fell short. It's also a reason why I'm not as high on LSU as other people are. I feel like they're the 2025 version of the 2024 Ole Miss, where they did patch a lot of holes, and on paper it looks great. Is it come together? Is it going to come together exactly how you want it to? That's the big concern. So, that is an excellent point, Jimmy. They're going to have some running backs, some talented running backs. They got a good offensive line relative to where they were. We just aren't going to know really what to expect from them on that front.
Yeah, I mentioned Gavin Sawchuk. One interesting thing I looked at is he has a much higher. Now he's coming from Oklahoma. Roy Dell spent most of his career at Alabama, but Gavin Sawchuk averages almost a full yard better than Roy Dell on his career yard per attempt number. So Roy Dell, by seniority, is a 6-year guy. Maybe Roy Dell gets the start and Sawchuk comes off the bench. But I would frankly bet on Sawchuk getting more carries versus Alabama than Roy Dell, just simply because over the course of his somewhat shorter career, he's been a more explosive, better back than Roy Dell has, who's more solid, I would say, than spectacular. I think Sawchuk has been occasionally spectacular. I think we'll see quite a bit of him. But if this does turn into a slogfest kind of game where both teams are running the ball, I do like this. The makeup of Alabama's top 2 backs, Richard Young and Daniel Hill in this game, they're sort of made for that. They're sort of made for all we're asking you to do is secure the ball and make 4 yards every time we hand it to you. That's what we want from you, is to move the chains and secure the ball and be big and strong and physical, because that's what we need. For instance, Alabama's got another back I don't think we will see much of Saturday, Kevin Riley. To me, he would be the example of, I wouldn't necessarily depend on him as a rain back on Saturday because the speed guys are the slippers and sliders. The power guys might be able to keep chains moving, keep possession, keep the third downs to 3rd and 3 instead of 3rd and 8, because 3rd and 8's Saturday will hurt you. It will be murder for Florida State. It would be bad for Alabama in the rain. 3rd and 8, that's more Alabama's wheelhouse than Florida State's this weekend. But with the rain, neither team wants to be in 3rd and 8. Castellanos wouldn't be good in 3rd and 8 in the sunshine. But with the rain, I think that should theoretically hurt Alabama's pass game a little bit. So you got to stay out of the 3rd and longs. But I do like Richard Young and Daniel Hill to be the type of backs that can do that.
I just think across the board, Alabama's going to be able to stay on schedule more than Florida State. Florida State will probably have some pretty explosive plays, and they could end up converting, a second long. Hey, at 2nd 13, Castellanos takes off. He ends up getting, 14 yards first down, and that can be frustrating. And you got to try to limit that as much as you can, but consistently staying on schedule. I think Alabama's a lot better equipped to do that. And we also have to understand, like a Deuce Robinson, 6'6", 223 pounds, big physical receiver. Alabama's got, this is where a 6'4", 202-pound cornerback like Dijon Lee could end up having a major impact, matching the size and athleticism combination of a Deuce Robinson. But I think in this particular style of game, the guys who are going to win underneath, create yardage after the catch, a Squirrel White. He's had a lot of success against Alabama in the past. 11 catches for over 100 yards, or maybe it was 10 catches for over 100 yards a couple of years ago when he was at Tennessee. He's going to be that slot option, more of the volume guy. I would expect him to be a big part of what Florida State wants to do in the passing game. But Alabama's receivers, they have some guys. I think Jeremy Bernard, yards after catch, Ryan Williams, Rico Scott's built for that as well. The big, more powerful, more physical receivers. Isaiah Horton can do more of that than you think that he can, having that size and length, and has the ability to win downfield. But he's better on the, stuff over the middle, the short to intermediate routes. Really, that was what he did for Miami. For whatever reason, they didn't send him vertical nearly enough, in my opinion, and didn't take advantage of him in that way. And he might not get used in that way in this game, but his familiarity doing that should help him. Even a guy like Lacier Brooks, if he ends up getting involved, Cole Adams being a reliable underneath option. If you got to go to a quick, short passing game to inch your way down the field and then complement what you're doing with the run game, I think Alabama is way better equipped to do that than Florida State at this point.
Yeah, just more weapons. I mean, Deuce Robinson and Squirrel White, those are names Alabama fans know because Squirrel's was at Tennessee and he's from Alabama and he's had success against Alabama. Deuce Robinson was a guy that Alabama recruited that ended up choosing USC. Now is transferred to Florida State. So we know those guys. But let me tell you, if Florida State is offered a trade before the game Saturday, if that's how this new landscape works, and they say, well, we'll give you our 2 best receivers, you give us your 2. That's not going to happen because Alabama's not trading their 2 for those 2 guys that you've heard of from Florida State. Ryan and Germ, who led this group a year ago, I think they'll lead the group again. Now, Zay Horton's going to be good. Rico Scott's going to be good. Alabama's got some depth, but it's still Ryan and Germ at the front of the line. And, yeah, they can take the short, wet ball pass, make somebody miss. They just need sure footing. They had a footing issue in the Michigan game last year. I hope some lessons may have been learned there. I don't know, but we Alabama sure seemed to play that first quarter on a slip and slide where Michigan seemed to have a better luck with their cleats. Hopefully Alabama's improved there or learned something there. Kind of hoping it rains in Tuscaloosa this morning as we record this, and tomorrow morning them practicing in the rain, I think would be an outstanding good luck. Maybe they need to learn to do that at practice. If you think about it, everybody's got an indoor and you got a sprinkler system in there, right? For fire. Yeah. Maybe you should use the sprinkler system. I don't know how that would ruin it. Maybe. I mean, they got to come up with something to practice in the rain.
Yeah. What's the drainage system look like in there? Because if it's solid, man, let's get that going.
Bill Curry, something sounds smart. This is before your time. You're a little bit younger than me, but when Bill Curry was at Alabama, they famously one day to practice, Bill Curry liked saying he liked to dot I's and cross T's. So, okay, what if it rains one game? So one afternoon for practice, they took a lot of the team to the swimming pool, the aquatic center, and they worked on throwing and catching the balls that have been in the pool, and the receivers are jumping in the pool and trying to catch balls. They worked on it as part of practice, and everybody's like, wow, that's great. And my thought was, and I'm just a real young guy, heck, I was a student at the time, my thought was, we're going to kill anybody we play in a pool. But it's not. That's not replicating what's going to happen on a wet turf mud field. What you do in a pool has nothing to do with that. It's about your footing. It's about that as much as anything. It's not so much that the ball is wet. And by the way, dunking it in a pool doesn't even replicate what happens when it gets mud and grass, and it's just an ugly ball. When you just dip it in a pool, by the way, it's going to dry in about 8 seconds.
Lather it up with Vaseline. That would probably be the best. And then make sure that all the players have to keep Vaseline on their hands. That's about the only way you could replicate. And it would probably be even worse doing it that way. But then they would learn to secure a football and learn to throw and catch with it, I guess. But yeah, let's hope that some of these, one of the things that I noticed in that Iowa State Kansas State game this past weekend, they dealt with rain, and I don't think either offense handled it very well. From speaking candidly, it wasn't until it stopped raining that they started getting things going. It was sloppy. It was, we did that whole thing where this game's drunk. Everybody was tweeting that. Yeah, it was frustrating if you were watching it, and especially wanting to see kind of.
It is drunk when it's raining an inch of Guinness an hour, like it was in the first.
That's like exactly
first half. Second half, no rain, touchdowns everywhere.
But that is one thing that I noticed is like Kansas State's receivers. Hey, when it's raining, you got to be able to take the gloves off and catch the football. I understand that a lot of guys, they rely on that. But it's a different type of game. And some guys, they continue to wear the gloves because it's the only way they know how to catch consistently. And then, you put yourself at a disadvantage when you're wearing gloves in the rain. So, this could be the Cole Adams game, right? Where, drop the gloves. And granted, we do know that in one of the scrimmages, he did have multiple drops. So maybe this shouldn't be the Cole. They have guys that can make it happen. Let's talk a little bit before we get out of here about, or I guess more about Alabama's offense against Tony White's defense, because this is going to be Ryan Grubb's first game as Alabama's offensive coordinator. There's been a lot of changes at play caller, changes at quarterback. Offensive line, you do have a lot of continuity, but running back, just not having Jam Miller, not having Justice Haynes, that was the biggest part of your run game last year. Your tight ends, we did see Josh Cuevas, but the two main guys were Robbie Utes and CJ Dupree, and how they won as blockers is not how the current crop of tight ends really wins. So, what are you expecting differently from this group on Saturday? And obviously, we're looking through the lens of weather, but more so just from the offense, as far as who do you think they feature? What do you think certain positions look like? What are your thoughts?
Weather aside, I do think even though the offense has to be similar, it's still Kalen DeBoer, it's still Nick Sheridan, the quarterback coach. It's not dramatically different. It's not like Ryan Grubb bought with him the Seattle Seahawks playbook and everything Alabama did last year's out the window. That's not the case at all. It's still the DeBoer Grubb playbook, and that's really what they used a year ago. But the quarterback is just dramatically different. It's just a tremendously different style, and therefore the offense is going to look different to Alabama fans, I think, in two principal ways. The first principal way is last year they threw it, I think, around 23, 24 times a game. I think that number is going to dramatically increase. I would say I wouldn't even be shocked if it was 35, but I think probably a better guess is 33, 34, 10 more pass attempts per game, which should be around 7 more completions, a game. It's going to look different, where it's almost what I would say a throw first. Last year was run first. This year's a throw first type offense, and that it's going to look different that way. The wide receiver core makeup is different. Last year, Ryan and Germ caught twice as many balls as the rest of the wide receiver room combined. That will absolutely not be the case this year. They're going to use receivers beyond the top 2 that will make plays and help this team. That's going to look different. The run game is going to be dramatically different. Last year's run game was centered around the best runner on the team, who was the quarterback. This year, the best runner on the team will be the running back, which is traditionally how football works. And I think that you will see more of a traditional running attack, both inside and outside, from Alabama's collection of backs who all have slightly different styles. But it's going to look a lot different. So I think a casual fan, just use a term, is going to say, wow, boy, they threw out last year's playbook. It's not that at all. It's just emphasis. It's emphasis on parts of the playbook that might not have been used a year ago are now heavily emphasized this year because the personnel changes. That's what the great offensive coordinators do. They look at their personnel and they say, these are the parts of the playbook that are going to work really well with these guys. Maybe next year it'll look totally different again as the personnel changes out. But I think it is going to look a lot different, even though, as we know, the playbook hasn't changed. The terminology is all the same. It's just different plays that fit Ty Simpson as opposed to the dramatically different plays that fit Jalen Milroe.
Yeah, I do think that the product that you're going to see is going to look drastically different. And that's just, last year they did what they had to do. They made the adjustments to fit around the players. Kalen DeBoer on the Kalen DeBoer show, I think it was yesterday or the day before when it was posted, he talked about, it's coaching is about adjustments and fitting things to your players. And Alabama had to do that last year. They won't have to do that this year. What they want to do more so fits with the personnel that they have. So then that's why I've said multiple times, the quarterback play caller marriage will be a lot more aligned naturally rather than one or the other having to make an adjustment to what the other is comfortable doing. And that makes the product a lot better, in my opinion, because they're both in their comfort zone. You look at Tony White's defense, it's a 3-3-5 defense, but they have that jack player. Both of their top two guys at that position are 6'1", 238 pounds, the exact same size. So it's going to look, you're going to see the stacked look, the 3-3-5 stacked linebackers over the defensive line. And the defensive line is not overly big. James Williams, the Nebraska transfer, he's 259 pounds. Jason Jenkins, the Tennessee transfer, he's, 276 pounds. And then, of course, you got Daryl Jackson, who is just a massive presence, 6'5", 300. He is a dude. He's going to be, and, you talk about 340 pounds essentially going against Parker Brailsford, who's 290, still considered a little bit undersized. Now, Parker will get after you. He's scrappy and does a great job, should be able to win the leverage game naturally. Being 6'1" compared to 6'5" with Daryl Jackson, like, I remember, I'm 6 foot, but in high school, we had some 5'9" offensive guards that just naturally got under you. And low man pads. Yeah, low man wins. That's the name of the game. And so, when I used to do board drills and all that stuff, I would 10-1 rather go against William Ming, who ended up playing at Alabama because he was 6'3", 6'4", and I was 6 foot. So I had that natural advantage on him rather than those guys. So I'm not saying that Parker Brailsford is going to get bullied or anything, and they're going to work. They got two big guards in there. Obviously, Jaden Roberts would make it a little bit bigger, but they're going to stunt. They're going to, they're going to angle. They're going to slant. They're going to do a lot of things with their defensive front. And we talk about 3-3-5s, and we say, okay, they're not going to be great at stopping the run because they run a three-man front. Well, they get in a lot of different looks depending on who they're going against. And because Alabama goes a lot of 12 personnel, you're probably going to see a lot of four-man fronts. But they also mug at least one of their linebackers, sometimes both of them. They're trying to create man blocking situations, one-on-one situations, a lot of times they're going to send 4. They might sometimes send 5 or maybe even 6, but a lot of times they're going to show 5 or 6, and then they're going to drop guys out. And that's still going to create some one-on-one matchups that they're going to try to win. As a quarterback, when you see that, when they're showing a certain look and you say, okay, it's pretty much man on man, I've got to get the football out quick because the chances of you winning all 5 or all 6 matchups are typically pretty rare. So you say, okay, I'm going to have to snap the football and get it out of my hand, let my guys make a play, but then they're rallying to the football really well. They're very aggressive in that sense, not aggressive as far as blitzing necessarily, but aggressive, getting downhill, getting to the football, forcing the football out of the quarterback's hands, and then everybody rallying. So that's something to keep an eye on if you are a fan is, sometimes Ty Simpson's going to feel like he's got to get the football out quick by what they're showing, and he didn't, and they're anticipating that, and they're going to end up, creating some second longs, third and long situations. So you've got to try to avoid that as much as possible. If you are in a, 3rd and 2 or a 2nd and 4, that's going to position you a lot better where they can't do that stuff quite as much. That's something to definitely keep an eye on. But also with the way that they like to throw a lot of different things at you with their defensive front, Jaden Roberts is a physically more impressive player than Gino Vandermark.
Agreed.
But as far as the communication and the mental aspect of it, I think that is where Gino Vandermark wins. So having the ability to communicate with the guys next to you, I think the communication side of it will be better against Florida State as a result of having Gino Vandermark in there. And so I actually think that's going to help the offensive line probably a lot more than people think.
I love that point. Think of this, Alabama fans, because I prefer, hey, all things being equal, who's the better football player? Who would I rather have out there for 100% of the snaps? I'll go with Jaden. I think he's a better player at his best than Gino is at his best. But I like this. If something ever happened to Parker Brailsford and he had to miss time or miss games, you know who the next center is going to be? Gino Vandermark. Alabama's got two centers out there. And the center is the guy that makes the calls, that communicates. Now you got two guys side by side out there that have that skill set, that leadership, and they're both experienced guys. Parker Brailsford in his third year starting in this offense. Gino Vandermark's a fifth-year senior. Cam Dewberry's a senior, by the way. Caden Proctor in his third year starting. Wilkin Formby is the least experienced guy. He started last year's opener, so he's not new. He's not a freshman by any means, year three guy, and he's the least experienced one. I like that makeup of this group. Now, will they be dominant? Will they win the Joe Moore? I don't think so, but you don't have to win the Joe Moore Award to be a really good offensive line. And I do think Alabama's got pieces in place to be good. Will it be perfect? No. But will it be good? Yes. And they'll need some help from the tight end position. We haven't talked about that. One thing I want to bring up that's another slight concern to me is the guys that were thought to be the top two tight ends going into this year, or the guys that I certainly advertised as would be the top two tight ends, Danny Lewis and Josh Cuevas. They've both been banged up. They've missed time through fall camp. I don't know what their status is. I assume, because I haven't heard any different, that we're going to see both of them on Saturday, but I don't know if they're healthy enough to sustain a 60-minute type performance. So we're probably going to see multiple tight ends. And one story from fall camp has been Caleb Edwards, the true freshman from California. What's shocking is he's a summer arrival and showed up getting people blocked. Usually freshman tight ends that stand out are like, wow, he can catch the ball better than I thought. This is the different freshman tight end that shows up like, wow, he can get people blocked, which is not a normal thing. So I think we're going to see Caleb Edwards. In fact, one of my bold predictions for Saturday will be, I think we see Caleb Edwards and Marshall Pritchett, both of them. And part of it is due to, I'm not sure how healthy Danny Lewis and Josh Cuevas both are. And we might see a lot of guys from that tight end room on Saturday. I think the number of tight ends Alabama has and how different they are stylistically is going to be an advantage for Alabama. Perfect world, you have completely healthy Danny Lewis and Josh Cuevas, and that's how you see on every snap. I don't think that's available to Alabama, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be a problem. I sort of like tight end as a strength, but the strength is more in the numbers as opposed to an individual dude.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point. And it's, two guys that I brought up as players who, could end up being surprise contributors, meaning they end up playing a little bit more in meaningful action in the season opener against Florida State that maybe fans aren't anticipating a lot. Caleb Edwards was one. The one on defense was London Simmons. Heard great things about him, but I want to bring up that in this game, you would love to have the CJ Duprees and the Robbie Utzes back.
Yeah.
Because if you got to run the football a little bit more, like the receiving side of it might not be as much of an advantage as it will be in some other games. But the fact that you've got Danny Lewis, who I've always thought was a pretty good blocker, if he's not 100%, and Josh Cuevas is not 100%, that presents some opportunities for Caleb Edwards. I think Brody Dalton is a guy that you need to keep an eye on. He's more of a blocker, a big body guy. Another player is, I think, Jay Lindsey has always been kind of a hell of a blocker. I just think the receiving side of things might not be as dynamic or as effective in that type of role. So for this game in particular, if you do end up seeing some Jay Lindsey, that could be due to the health of some of the other tight ends and the style of game in which they might have to play. They might say, hey, we know Jay Lindsey will get after some people. So, that's something to keep in mind. Another point that I wanted to go back to with the offensive line and the communication side of it that you brought up before, it was a great point, the two center conversation. A couple of years ago with Seth McLaughlin and Jalen Milroe couldn't handle as much of the mental side of things. And so Seth McLaughlin had to pick up even more of the slack. I think that caused some of his yips. He was thinking about a lot of things, making sure he had the offenses, the T's crossed and the I's dotted, the I's dotted, the I's dotted. But when you think about, like, I think Parker Brailsford handled that a little bit better last year. I think Jalen Milroe, being a little bit more advanced and a little bit more experienced, he was able to take on a little bit more of that responsibility. But between Ty Simpson and the fact that he's set and learned, he's known as kind of a, cerebral type of player. You look at a guy like Parker Brailsford and the experience that he has, and you add the element of having Geno Vandermark, who can accept some of those responsibilities and help out as well. I think that's going to be really beneficial for Alabama's offense kind of across the board, and you won't see as many mental errors as maybe you saw a couple of years ago and even at times last year. So that's just another element or something to keep an eye on. Jimmy, do you have anything else before we hop out of here, brother?
I just want to say, whenever you face an offense like Gus Malzahn, they're going to attack you on the perimeter, but you beat them inside out. And I think a real key to this game will be Tim Keenan, Justin Jefferson, Deontay Lawson, Nakai Hill-Green, Bray Hubbard, and Keon Sabb. That's the middle of the Alabama defense. They have to be dominant on Saturday. If they're dominant inside to where you're sending the message to Florida State, hey, you can run that stuff all you want, but it ain't working inside. You've got to run outside to make a play, that especially on a wet field. It will be hugely advantageous, and I think that's going to be a strength for Alabama all year long. I think they're very good up the middle, starting with big Tim Keenan.
Yeah, I think that's going to end up playing a massive part of this. And understand, a guy like Justin Jefferson, his athleticism, ability to get sideline to sideline. If you're going to spy, Tommy Castellanos, I think Nakai Hill-Green, don't think he would do bad at that. Obviously, Deontay Lawson, don't know if he's 100% necessarily, but also, the lost weight should help him a little bit on that front.
It's a wet field. I'm just now thinking of this. It's a wet field. I'm not sure Saturday's a great day for Deontay to be out there, to be honest.
Good point.
If we got to save him for 12 games, I'm not sure that's the first game we want to test how healthy that knee is playing on the wet field. And this does feel like, and I know he's been one of your favorites from when the moment he got off the bus, but I do think this is a Justin Jefferson game. I mean, he's built for this. I think he's just an ideal defender to face this offense.
I'm going to go ahead and tell you everything that Harold Perkins provided LSU against Alabama and Bryce Young a few years ago. I think Justin Jefferson can give you that element as far as the spy. And when he tries to break contain, immediately applying pressure. And if Castellanos doesn't get rid of it, Justin Jefferson's the type that can make him pay for it. He can deliver a blow. So, I agree with you. I think he's going to have a massive role on Saturday and be a really important part of what Alabama's going to want to do defensively. Jimmy, I appreciate you hopping on here with me.
Of course.
And just in-depth preview for everybody. We kind of were going to be more specific with offense, defense, but I think we covered everything pretty generally. All the points I wanted to talk about, I think we got to, and I think you raised some excellent points. So I hope everybody enjoyed it. We'll be back doing this again, hopefully next week. Might have an announcement on that front here pretty soon, but I appreciate everything that you bring to Alabama fans in general. The job that you and Luke do over at Locked On Bama is absolutely phenomenal. Would highly recommend everybody go subscribe to where you can get Jimmy every day, which I'm assuming that most of our audience is already over there. But if you aren't, I would highly recommend doing that because it's always a great conversation. Jimmy, appreciate you hopping on here with me, brother, and we will have to do this again soon.
Love doing the show, man. It's fantastic every week.
I may not suit up on Saturdays anymore, but I'm still in the game.
Let's roll.
In here, I call the plays, make adjustments, and lay it on the line. Want to feel that fire, that rush? Then you've got to get in the game. I used to say it in the tunnel, and I still say it now. Let's roll.